Chapter 1. After 5 years of marriage, Edward's stamina was as vigorous as ever. Every time he wanted Alice, he was fierce and relentless. That night, Alice fainted outright. The phone on the bedside table kept vibrating, waking her up. "Edward, I'll be landing in City A tomorrow morning. Can you come pick me up at the airport?" The sender was Edward's goddess, Eulalia García, the Garcia family's so-called fake daughter. 5 years ago, when Alice Garcia was finally found and brought back to the Garcia family, Eulalia learned that she was actually the nanny's biological daughter. At the same time, Edward Hernandez had been set up by his enemies. After a car accident, he lost his sight. The Hernandez and Garcia families had long arranged a marriage alliance. Yet on the day of the wedding, Eulalia suddenly fled and abandoned the ceremony. Unwilling to offend the Hernandez family, the Garcias had Alice marry in her place. Edward strongly opposed it, but the old master of the Hernandez family insisted that only the family's true daughter had the right to marry into the Hernandez family. At that time, Edward had not yet gained enough power or independence, so he had no choice but to agree. Alice fell in love with Edward at first sight. She spared no effort traveling everywhere to find the best doctors for him. But Edward not only refused to cooperate with the treatments, he also spoke harshly to her and treated her coldly. Left with no other choice, Alice lied and claimed that she was Eulalia. Edward believed her. Only then did he let down his guard and actively cooperate with treatment, eventually regaining his sight. However, when he later discovered that Eulalia had seemingly vanished without a trace, he assumed Alice had forced her away. From then on, he regarded Alice as a thorn in his side. Alice had tried to explain more than once, but Edward refused to believe her. He even flew into a rage and called her a liar. The doctor had warned that Edward must not be emotionally agitated, or he might lose his sight again. Because of that, Alice could only keep silent. Fortunately, Edward eventually accepted her. From the cold distance in the beginning, to the attentive care he showed now, Alice liked pink diamonds. So he arranged countless bidding events and bought numerous pink diamonds for her. Even for something as simple as a mild cold, he would make a huge fuss and invite the best medical experts in the entire city to treat her. She was afraid of thunder. Whenever a storm came, he would cancel all his work and take her out of the harbor city to avoid the rain. If she wanted the stars, he wouldn't give her the moon instead, he would try to give her the stars themselves. The sound of water in the bathroom suddenly stopped, interrupting Alice's thoughts. Looking at the man walking out of the bathroom, Alice's heart skipped a beat, and an uneasy feeling rose within her. But she quickly comforted herself. Eulalia was already part of Edward's past. Now, he was her husband. They treated each other with respect and affection. The model couple everyone in City A admired. Even if Eulalia returned to the country, it would not change anything. "You're awake." Edward walked over, leaned down, and held her in his arms. With a low chuckle, he said, "Let me carry you to take a bath." His voice was deep and husky, giving people a sense of reassurance. Alice couldn't help nodding and wrapped her arms around his neck. The next second, the phone vibrated again. Out of the corner of her eye, Alice glanced at it. It was still Eulalia. "Edward, are you still angry with me? I'm sorry. What happened 5 years ago was my fault. But I had no choice but to leave. Please give me a chance. Let me explain everything to you in person, okay?" Alice caught the brief moment when Edward's breathing paused, but he quickly returned to normal, picked her up, and walked into the bathroom. Alice finally let out a sigh of relief. She had truly been overthinking things. He loved her so much. That wouldn't change just because Eulalia had returned. That night, the two of them fell asleep in each other's arms as usual. Early the next morning, after Edward left the house, Alice went to the visa center. At the end of the month, it would be their 5th wedding anniversary. She planned to go to Iceland with Edward to see the Northern Lights. However, the staff rejected her application. "Your marriage certificate is fake. We cannot process a visa for you." Alice froze. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake." The staff confirmed several times that the information was absolutely correct. Left with no other choice, Alice went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The records showed that she was still single, but Edward was listed as married. His spouse was Eulalia. Alice's legs instantly went weak, and a chill spread through her whole body as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Eulalia had disappeared for 5 whole years without a single trace of news. When had she registered her marriage with Edward? And why had Edward lied to her? Chapter 2. To get to the bottom of it, Alice hurried to Hernandez Corporation. Just as she arrived at the office, she heard Eulalia's voice. Edward, since we are the real legally married couple, when do you plan to tell my sister the truth? Soon. Edward's voice was gentle as he comforted her. At the family banquet at the end of the month, Grandpa will announce that I'm inheriting the Hernandez family. Once I secure the inheritance, I'll let everyone know that you are the rightful Mrs. Hernandez. That's wonderful. Eulalia was overjoyed. She cautiously asked, after all this time, have you really never developed feelings for my sister? No. The man's voice was cold and indifferent, completely different from the tenderness he showed in bed. Eulalia, the person I've always loved is you. That has never changed. Every single word entered Alice's ears, like sharp blades stabbing straight into her heart. All the color drained from her face, and her whole body trembled uncontrollably. So they really were married. If Eulalia was Mrs. Hernandez, then what was she? What about everything she had given over the past 5 years? What about the intimacy they shared every night? Alice returned to the car in a daze. She clenched her palms tightly, trying to stop the tears from falling, but they still streamed down uncontrollably. Her vision blurred as a bone-deep hatred spread through her body. She had thought Edward had long forgotten Eulalia, but it turned out he had secretly registered his marriage with her behind Alice's back. He could choose not to love her, but he had no right to deceive her. And he certainly had no right to humiliate her like this. Alice wiped her face roughly and bit her lip hard. Since Edward treated her like a joke, then she would teach him a lesson. She would make him understand the price of deceiving her. She took out her phone and removed someone from her blacklist. I'll cut ties with Edward as soon as possible. Does your promise still stand? The person she contacted was Edward's sworn rival, Calvin Cruz, the current head of the Cruz family, the richest family in City A. 5 years ago, when she had just returned to the Garcia family, this young heir of City A had fallen in love with her at first sight during the family recognition banquet. He spent a fortune setting off 99 fireworks displays at the harbor. He even had 99,999 bird of paradise flowers flown in from overseas, all just to confess his love to her. But Alice's heart belonged entirely to Edward. She didn't even spare Calvin a glance. In the end, after the two got married, Calvin left City A with only one sentence. My promise will always stand. If one day you regret your decision, or if he hurts you, contact me anytime. After that, he disappeared without a trace. 5 years had passed, and Alice didn't know whether he still remembered that promise. The next second, Calvin directly sent her a voice call. His voice was low and hoarse. Of course it still stands. Give me half a month to finish handling my work. At the end of the month, I'll return to the country and give you a grand wedding. Alice hesitated for a moment. But I don't love you. Do you really not mind? The man on the other end chuckled softly. Feelings can grow. I'm confident I can make you fall in love with me. Alice gave a quiet mem. Then I'll wait for you to come back. Just as she finished speaking, the car door was suddenly pulled open, and Edward's voice sounded beside her. Alice, who were you talking to on the phone? Edward was possessive and controlling. If he found out she planned to marry his sworn enemy, he would definitely not let it go. To avoid unnecessary trouble, she couldn't let him discover anything before she left. Alice answered calmly, a friend overseas. Edward hummed in response and didn't question further, but his gaze fell on her swollen red eyes. Why were you crying? Who upset you? He frowned slightly, then suddenly seemed to think of something and changed the subject. By the way, I heard from my secretary that you went to my office. Why did you leave without even saying hello? Alice's breathing paused. For a moment she hesitated between brushing it off and confronting him. Soon, she chose the latter. Edward, actually, I saw the message Eulalia sent you last night. Before she could finish speaking, Edward's phone rang. He glanced at it and quickly answered. All right, I'll come back immediately. With that, he turned and was about to leave, only then remembering Alice. Sorry. Something came up at the company. I have to go back right away. He leaned down, intending to kiss her. Alice instinctively turned her head to avoid it. Work is more important. Go take care of it first. Edward paused slightly. She seemed a bit unusual today, but when he thought about how Eulalia was still waiting for him, he had no mood to think further. Then go home first. If there's anything, we'll talk tonight. After throwing out those words, Edward strode away without looking back. Chapter 3. Watching the man's hurried departing figure, Alice's nails dug deeply into her palms. There was no need to guess. The call must have been from Eulalia. Sure enough, Alice soon received a message from Eulalia on WeChat. Sister, even though you stayed by Edward's side for 5 years, one single phone call from me can pull him away from you. If you know what's good for you, pack your things and get out of the Hernandez family as soon as possible. Don't humiliate yourself any further. It was the truth. So Alice didn't reply. Distracted, she accidentally rear-ended another car while driving home. The accident was serious, the airbags deployed, and she felt dizzy and disoriented. In her panic, the first person she thought to call was Edward, but the phone kept ringing with no answer. In the end, a kind passerby called an ambulance for her. When Alice was taken to the hospital, she happened to see Edward getting out of a car while carrying Eulalia in his arms. Don't be afraid. You'll see the doctor right away. He comforted the woman in his arms softly, a gentleness on his face that Alice had never seen before. His eyes were filled only with Eulalia. He didn't even notice that Alice was lying on the stretcher beside him. After finishing the examination, the doctor immediately told Alice to call her family. A concussion and a scalp hematoma are not small matters. Someone needs to stay with you. Call your family and have them come here immediately. Alice Garcia had no choice but to call the Garcia residence. The call was answered by a servant. Sir and Madam just left the house. We heard that Miss Eulalia was injured. Although Eulalia was not the Garcia family's biological daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia treated her far more importantly than their own biological daughter. Over the past 5 years, they often flew overseas to visit Eulalia. Every time the family gathered together, they were never in City A. Alice knew very well that even if they learned she and Eulalia were injured at the same time, the one who would be abandoned would always be her. A dull ache spread through Alice's chest, like a blunt blade slowly cutting into her heart. She silently hung up the phone. The doctor asked, "Did you tell your family? When will they arrive?" Alice smiled self-mockingly. "They're busy. It's fine. I can manage on my own." Half an hour later, Alice was lying on the hospital bed resting when she overheard nurses chatting nearby. Same last name, yet such different fates. That Miss Garcia over here got into a car accident and even suffered a concussion, but no family members came to stay with her. Meanwhile, the Miss Garcia upstairs only cut her finger, and her husband invited more than a dozen specialists to examine her, and even reserved the entire VIP floor. Exactly. Her parents came too. They were so worried about her, afraid she might get a scar, even though that tiny wound had already healed. Even though Alice already knew the truth, hearing those words still made her heart ache so much she could barely breathe. When she had first been brought back to the Garcia family, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia held her tightly and cried. They promised they would love her well and make up for everything she had suffered. She had believed them completely, but reality disappointed her again and again. It turned out that the person they truly loved had always been Eulalia, even though Alice was their biological daughter. If they didn't love her, why had they brought her back? Why make promises so easily, giving her hope, only to shatter it later? Alice bit her lower lip hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Since they didn't care about her at all, then she didn't want them anymore either. All these so-called family members could belong to Eulalia. Once she let go of that attachment, Alice felt much lighter and soon fell asleep. Her injuries were serious, and she stayed in the hospital for an entire week. During that time, Edward never contacted her once, as if he had completely forgotten her existence. Yet every day, Alice could hear news about him and Eulalia from the nurses. For example, when Eulalia refused to take her medicine because it was bitter, Edward personally fed it to her. For example, when Eulalia had nightmares at night, he stayed by her side without leaving for a single moment. For example, when Eulalia wanted to go shopping, he had luxury brands deliver their newest clothing and handbags directly to the hospital room so she could choose whatever she liked without even leaving the ward. By the end, Alice's initial bitterness had turned into numbness. She had already decided to cut ties with Edward. Everything about him had nothing to do with her anymore. After completing the discharge procedures, Alice was about to leave when she unexpectedly ran into Edward in the elevator. Seeing her there, he looked stunned. Alice? Why are you at the hospital? Before she could answer, he continued on his own. You came at the perfect time. Eulalia was injured and lost quite a lot of blood. Your blood types match, so you can give her some. He didn't even give her a chance to refuse. Grabbing her wrist, he pulled her straight toward the blood collection room. Chapter 4. Alice struggled desperately. Edward. I refuse. Edward's expression darkened, his voice low and impatient. The blood bank in City A is running out. Rh-negative blood can't be found anywhere. Alice let out a cold laugh. What does that have to do with me? She and I are neither family nor friends. I will not donate blood to her. Edward's eyes darkened as a thought suddenly crossed his mind. Are you angry because I didn't tell you that Eulalia returned to the country? It all happened suddenly. I didn't have time to explain. Give Eulalia the transfusion first, and we can talk about everything else later. After saying that, he immediately instructed the nurse to draw blood. Alice looked at the nurse coldly. I just recovered from a serious illness, and I'm suffering from severe anemia. Are you sure you want to draw my blood? The nurse froze when she heard that. Mr. Hernandez. In that case, it really isn't appropriate to draw blood. Otherwise, her life could be in danger. Edward frowned slightly. When were you sick? Why didn't I know about it? Before Alice Garcia could speak, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia suddenly appeared in the blood collection room. They thought Alice had come to donate blood to Eulalia, and their faces immediately lit up with approval as they praised her for being sensible. Alice's body stiffened. She turned to leave, but Edward grabbed her wrist. Alice. Now is not the time to throw a tantrum. Eulalia is seriously injured. You can't just watch her die. He turned to the nurse and ordered. Draw the blood. Hurry up. If anything happens to Eulalia, can you take responsibility for it? Edward was the largest shareholder of this hospital. The nurse didn't dare offend him and immediately picked up the syringe. Let go of me. Alice struggled fiercely. This is a crime. I'm going to call the police. Mr. Garcia's expression darkened. Alice. I just praised you for being sensible, but I didn't expect you to refuse even such a small thing as donating some blood. How cold-blooded. Yes, Alice. Mrs. Garcia said with a frown. We raised Eulalia for more than 20 years. We already see her as our own daughter. Just think of it as helping us, all right? All the color drained from Alice's face. She's your daughter, then what about me? When you worried about her being injured, did you ever think that I also? Before she could finish, Eulalia's voice suddenly rang out. Dad, Mom, don't make things difficult for my sister. If she doesn't want to give me blood, then forget it. We'll think of another solution. A mocking smile appeared on Alice's face. She knew exactly what Eulalia was doing, pretending to retreat in order to advance. Alice had no interest in watching her act, nor did she want to waste words on people who didn't love her. She stood up to leave, but Edward forcefully pushed her back into the chair. Seeing this, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia rushed forward to help. They grabbed Alice's wrists and ankles, leaving her completely unable to move. The moment the needle pierced her vein, Alice heard the sound of her heart shattering. She looked at the three of them in disbelief. They had once been the people closest to her, the ones she trusted the most. Yet now, for the sake of Eulalia, they forced her to give blood. The difference between love and indifference was truly this vast. In the past, she had been blind in both eyes and heart, believing she was the one being loved. Alice Garcia's heart turned to ashes, and she stopped struggling. After the blood was drawn, darkness filled her vision and she collapsed onto the floor. But Edward and Mr. and Mrs. Garcia didn't even glance at her. They surrounded Eulalia and left together. In the final moment before losing consciousness, Alice saw the victorious smile on Eulalia's face. She had a very long dream. In the dream, she and Edward finally had a child born from love. But suddenly Eulalia appeared, not only taking Edward away, but also stealing their child. Alice turned to Mr. and Mrs. Garcia for help, but they stood on Eulalia's side as well, pointing at her and scolding her for being unreasonable. Alice woke up abruptly from the nightmare. She found herself lying on a hospital bed, with Edward sitting beside her. When he saw that she had awakened, he quickly stood up. You're finally awake. Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? The worry in his eyes didn't seem fake. But Alice knew very well that he was only acting, suppressing her emotions. She spoke slowly. I dreamed that Eulalia took everything from me, including you and my parents. Edward froze for a moment, then quickly returned to normal. That isn't real. It was only a dream. Chapter 5. No, this was not a dream. They didn't love her at all. They forced her to give blood to Eulalia, yet didn't even dare to tell her the truth. Edward paused for a moment. I just found out that you were in a car accident a week ago. Why didn't you tell me? Alice let out a mocking laugh. I did call you. You never answered. Edward looked slightly embarrassed. I'm sorry, Alice. I must have been in a meeting. That's why I didn't pick up. I promise it won't happen again next time. Looking at the man she had loved deeply for 5 years, Alice's heart began to race, and her emotions suddenly spiraled out of control. Edward, tell me honestly, what exactly is your relationship with Eulalia? Edward's breathing paused, and his eyes flickered. She and I are already in the past. Don't overthink things. Ha! Alice laughed angrily. Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? They had already registered their marriage. What kind of past was that supposed to be? Just as Alice was about to lose control and slap him, Eulalia walked into the ward accompanied by Mr. and Mrs. Garcia. Sister, thank you for donating blood to me. I heard from Edward that you fainted, so I came to check on you. It's all my fault. If you hadn't given me blood, you wouldn't have collapsed. Alice looked at her expressionlessly. If you love acting so much, go become an actress. Don't come here and disgust me. Edward's face immediately darkened. Alice, Eulalia came to see you out of kindness. What kind of attitude is that? Mr. Garcia's tone was displeased. I told you long ago that both you and Eulalia are daughters of the Garcia family. You should get along with each other. Look at how you're behaving now. Mrs. Garcia frowned. Eulalia finally made up her mind to return to the country. Are you trying to drive her away again? Alice trembled with anger. She didn't know the exact reason why Eulalia went abroad 5 years ago, but she was certain it had nothing to do with her. Yet Mrs. Garcia blamed her without even asking what really happened. Such blatant favoritism was simply ridiculous. Alice was about to explain when Eulalia suddenly clutched her head. Ow, my head feels so dizzy. Soon after, she fainted at just the right moment. Edward rushed over immediately, lifting her into his arms and hurrying out of the ward. Seeing this, Mr. and Mrs. Garcia had no mood left to scold Alice. They quickly followed him out. Alice lay on the hospital bed, her heart utterly desolate. Suddenly, a sharp pain spread through her lower abdomen, and a warm flow ran down between her legs. Her hospital gown was quickly stained red with blood, and Alice's eyelids twitched violently. Her period had been delayed for more than half a month. In an instant, a terrible thought flashed through her mind. She hurriedly pressed the call button. The doctor arrived quickly, examined her, and then told her that she was pregnant, but there were signs of a miscarriage, and the pregnancy needed immediate protection. Those words exploded in Alice's ears like thunder. Her mind went completely blank. She was actually pregnant. After a brief moment of shock, she made a decisive decision. There's no need to save the pregnancy. This child wasn't planned. The doctor looked at her and spoke earnestly. Did you have a fight with your husband? Miscarriage is not a small matter. If you're upset, don't make a decision right away. You might regret it later. Alice thought about the fake marriage certificate and smiled bitterly. I don't have a husband. The doctor frowned. Then discuss it with the child's father before making a decision. At that moment, Alice's phone rang. It happened to be Edward calling. Thinking about what the doctor said, Alice hesitated for a moment, then inexplicably answered the call. Edward, Before she could say the words I'm pregnant, the man's furious voice burst through the phone. Alice, Eulalia has been unconscious this whole time. Are you satisfied now? You'd better pray that she's safe. Otherwise, I won't let you off. Edward hung up immediately. The ward fell completely silent, and the doctor had heard everything. He seemed to understand why Alice didn't want the child. A moment later, Alice spoke softly. Doctor, there's no need to discuss it anymore. Please arrange the surgery for me as soon as possible. Half an hour later, she was pushed into the operating room. Because she was allergic to anesthesia, she remained conscious throughout the entire procedure. The surgery was extremely painful. but she didn't make a single sound. Yet the tears never stopped flowing. After it was over, the nurse sent her back to the ward and told her to rest well. She would be able to leave the hospital the next day. Alice didn't sleep the entire night. Her mind was filled with memories of the past with Edward. He once said that he wanted to have a child with her. If it's a boy, when he grows up we'll protect you together. If it's a girl, then I'll protect both of you. In any case, boy or girl, I'll love them all the same. Once, those words had been so sweet. Now, they only made her heart ache even more. Chapter 6. The next morning, Alice forced her weak and aching body to return to the villa. She directed the servants to gather all of her belongings, including the couple items she shared with Edward and the gifts he had given her. Several large boxes were filled to the brim. Alice carried everything into the courtyard and set them on fire. Amid the rising smoke, Edward returned home. Alice, what are you burning? Without even looking up, Alice replied, trash. But Edward clearly saw the shell wind chime inside one of the boxes. They had made it together during their honeymoon in the Maldives. He was about to ask about it when his phone vibrated. After glancing at the message, he quickly thought of something else. By the way, Alice, Eulalia is out of danger now. To avoid upsetting her again, behave yourself for a while and try not to appear in front of her too often. As he spoke, he took out a diamond necklace from his pocket and tried to put it around Alice's neck. Alice suddenly pushed him away. The diamond necklace fell to the ground with a sharp clink. Edward, she's the one who keeps provoking me. Alice glared at him through clenched teeth, anger blazing in her eyes. Her face was frighteningly pale, and her once delicate, rosy lips now looked like withered petals. Her whole body seemed weak and sickly. Edward inhaled sharply. Are you sick? Why does your face look so terrible? He reached toward her forehead to check her temperature, but she avoided him. Alice wanted to tell him that she had just lost their child, but when the words reached her lips, she held them back. The person he loved was not her. Why humiliate herself by saying it? Her unusual behavior made Edward realize something was wrong. Alice, what exactly happened? Can you tell me? Alice stared straight at him, a mocking curve appearing on her lips. Edward, you knew I have severe anemia, yet you forced me to donate blood to Eulalia. You even left me when I was feeling unwell just to accompany her. Between me and Eulalia, who is your wife? Edward's breathing paused slightly, a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. Did you hear something? Alice's eyes were filled with ridicule. I'll ask you one last time. What exactly is your relationship with Eulalia? Edward's gaze darkened, and his breathing grew heavier, just as he was about to confess. His phone rang. This ringtone was different from his usual one. It must have been specially set for Eulalia. Sure enough, Edward didn't even check the caller ID. He simply said, something urgent came up at the company. I have to go immediately. Since you're not feeling well, stay home and rest. Then he turned and strode away. Soon after, Eulalia posted a message on her social media and tagged Alice. My dear, having you is the best thing in the world. I promise you, I will never leave you again. In the photo, Edward was lowering his head as he peeled a pomegranate, a gentleness on his face that Alice had never seen before. A breeze passed by, and a chill spread through her entire body. All the color drained from Alice's face, her nails digging deeply into her palms. She had given Edward a chance. If he had chosen to tell the truth just now, she would have fulfilled his wish and let him be with Eulalia. But unfortunately, he still chose lies and deception. In that case, he shouldn't blame her for turning ruthless. Her phone vibrated. It was a bank notification. Ping and bank reminder, Calvin has transferred 5,201,414,520 yen to your account ending in 6979. Current balance. At the same time, Calvin sent her a message on WeChat. I've transferred the bride price to you. If you have any other requests, just say it, as long as it's something I can do. Alice replied without hesitation. I want the Hernandez Corporation shares under Edward's name, and I want Edward and Eulalia to lose their reputation completely. Can you do that? Calvin replied instantly. As you wish. Chapter 7. After burning everything, Alice ordered the servants to pull out the bird of paradise flowers in the garden. Edward had planted them himself on her birthday during the second year after she moved in. They had once been the thing she cherished the most. This is your favorite flower. I want you to see it every morning when you wake up. The meaning of the bird of paradise flower was loyalty, freedom, love, and happiness. But Alice felt those beautiful words had nothing to do with Edward. She erased every trace of herself. Just as she was about to leave, Edward returned with Eulalia. Seeing that she looked like she was about to leave, he frowned deeply and immediately blocked her path. You're not feeling well. Why aren't you resting properly? Eulalia rolled her eyes slightly and said in a fake, sweet tone, Sister, Mom and Dad heard that you weren't feeling well, so they asked me to bring you some supplements. Alice interrupted coldly. I don't have time to watch you act. Move. Edward's voice lowered slightly. Eulalia came out of kindness. Do you have to be so aggressive? Alice had no interest in wasting words with them. She pushed Edward aside and walked toward the door. The next second, Edward grabbed her wrist. Your parents went abroad on vacation, so they asked me to take care of Eulalia for a few days. Since you're not feeling well, stay at home and rest. Don't run around. After saying that, he lifted Alice into his arms, ignoring her strong protests. He carried her back to the bedroom and placed her on the soft bed. Alice was furious. She swung her hand to slap him, but he easily dodged it. He looked down at her, his face filled with shock and irritation. I'm concerned about you. Why are you so angry? Did you take the wrong medicine? After a pause, he added, Are you angry because I didn't discuss it with you before bringing Eulalia home? I admit I handled that poorly, but your parents asked me personally. I couldn't refuse. Alice seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. She laughed so hard that her shoulders shook violently. Edward, have you told so many lies that you've started believing them yourself? Edward paused, pressing his lips together in silence. No matter how slow he might be, he now realized that Alice must have learned something. He stared at her, his eyes flickering slightly. At that moment, Eulalia walked into the room. Edward, I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat at home? Edward snapped out of his thoughts. What do you want to eat? I'll have the servants make it for you, Eulalia said coquettishly. I want the seafood noodles you make. Can you cook them for me? All right, I'll go make them now. After Edward left, Eulalia looked at Alice with a provocative expression. After everything that's happened lately, you should know how much he cares about me, right? Alice looked at her coldly. Behind her back, she quietly turned on the recording function on her phone. Eulalia, what exactly are you trying to say? Eulalia snorted proudly, her face full of disdain. You think just because you stayed by Edward's side for 5 years that you could win his heart? Dream on. The person he loves is me, not you. Is that so? Alice said casually. He only takes extra care of you out of consideration for my parents. Don't flatter yourself. Flatter myself? You're the one lying to yourself. Eulalia was so angry that her face twisted as she blurted out. You probably still don't know this, but even your marriage certificate is fake. I'm the rightful Mrs. Hernandez. And another thing, Mom and Dad don't like you either, even though you're their biological daughter. The only person in their hearts is me. Alice pretended to be shocked. A fake marriage certificate? That's impossible. Back then you ran away from the wedding. I was the one who stayed by Edward's side and searched everywhere for doctors to cure his eyes. How could he treat me like this? Eulalia laughed mockingly. Speaking of that, I should actually thank you. At first, when he tampered with the marriage registration, it was just an impulsive decision, but later, you used my identity to accompany him during his treatments. That only made him more determined that he would marry no one but me. Alice, how does it feel to spend all that effort preparing a wedding dress for someone else? The truth was exactly what Alice had suspected. Edward had deceived her 5 years ago. All the sincerity she had given him had been completely wasted. But realizing it now was not too late. Chapter 8. At the Hernandez family banquet 5 days later, she would play this recording in public, exposing the true faces of Edward and Eulalia and making them lose all dignity. Edward originally planned to publicly announce at the family banquet at the end of the month that I am the real Mrs. Hernandez. But since you're still Mom and Dad's biological daughter, I told you out of kindness for their sake. Seeing Alice remain silent, Eulalia grew even more smug. If you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of everyone, pack your things and get out as soon as possible. Alice came back to her senses and curled her lips into a cold smile. Eulalia, are you really thinking about mom and dad, or are you afraid I'll tell Edward the truth? Her words struck Eulalia's weak point. Her face immediately turned pale. I was just trying to be nice. And you won't even appreciate it? Alice continued provoking her. What's wrong? Did you get angry out of embarrassment? I'll go tell Edward right now that I was the one who took care of him back then. I'd really like to see whether he'll still treat you the same way after he learns the truth. You're not going anywhere. If you do, I'll kill you. Eulalia hissed in a low voice. Her eyes filled with malice. 5 years ago, you suddenly appeared and turned me from the young lady of the Garcia family into a servant's daughter. From that day on, I told myself that one day I would take back everything that belonged to me. And now I finally have. Not only mom and dad, even Edward. The person they care about is me. You may have the title of the Garcia family's eldest daughter, but in reality you are nothing. No one loves you. No one cares about you. She glared viciously at Alice, the muscles on her cheeks trembling. If you dare tell Edward the truth, I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Just then, footsteps sounded outside the door. Eulalia's eyes shifted slightly. Suddenly, she raised her hand and slapped herself several times. Sister, please stop hitting me. Edward and I are innocent. If you don't believe me, I'll leave right now and never come back to bother you again. She cried pitifully, tears streaming down her face, while her cheeks quickly became swollen and red from her own slaps. The next second, Edward pushed the door open and rushed in. Seeing this scene, he naturally assumed that Alice had been bullying Eulalia. His face darkened instantly. Even though you and Eulalia aren't related by blood, she's still the daughter your parents raised for more than 20 years. How could you hit her? Alice laughed in disbelief. I didn't hit her. She staged this entire act herself. Since she already had the evidence, there was no need to keep pretending with them. She turned to leave, but Eulalia suddenly grabbed her wrist. Sister, don't go. I'm the one who should leave. Alice instinctively pulled her arm back, but Eulalia seized the opportunity to fall to the floor, hitting her head and breaking the skin. Edward inhaled sharply and quickly picked her up. Alice, you've gone too far. Apologize immediately, or don't blame me for being ruthless. Eulalia cried and said. Edward, don't blame my sister. She's just afraid that I'll take you away from her. So she acted irrationally for a moment. Don't defend her, Edward said coldly. This time I must teach her a lesson, or she'll keep bullying you in the future. After saying that, Edward took out his phone and called the police. My wife deliberately assaulted someone. Please detain her for a few days and teach her a proper lesson. Realizing he wasn't joking, Alice quickly took out her phone. I didn't lay a hand on her. If you don't believe me, I'll let you hear the recording. Eulalia's expression changed instantly, and she fainted at just the right moment. Edward no longer had any interest in listening to the recording. He hurried away with Eulalia in his arms. In the end, Alice was taken away by the police and locked in a detention center. Because Edward had made certain arrangements beforehand, she received special treatment. The guards and inmates worked together to torment her in every possible way. They stole her food, urinated on her bed, and refused to let her sleep. Not only that, they beat and kicked her, ripped out her fingernails, and cut her beautiful long hair into a ragged mess, as if it had been chewed by a dog. Chapter 9. 5 days later, there was not a single part of Alice's body that was unharmed. Before she was released, a guard slapped her across the face. Mr. Hernandez ordered us to teach you a lesson. I bet you've learned your place now, haven't you? Alice's face was ashen. Even if she didn't want to admit it, she had no choice but to accept the truth. Edward could be this ruthless toward her. At that moment, tears of regret finally fell from her eyes. She regretted ever loving him. Even more, she regretted foolishly staying by his side for 5 whole years. She swore that one day she would make Edward pay the price he deserved. As soon as Alice stepped out of the detention center, she received a call from Calvin. I just landed. Where are you? Should I come pick you up so we can register our marriage? Alice thought for a moment. Can we postpone it for a week? I want to go somewhere and clear my mind. Calvin was silent for a moment on the other end of the phone. That's fine. Do you want me to go with you? No. Alice sent him the recording from her phone. At tomorrow's Hernandez family banquet, The old master of the Hernandez family will announce Edward as the heir. I want everyone there to hear this recording. All right, I'll arrange it. I'll even live stream it for you to watch. Calvin replied. Thank you. Alice sounded extremely exhausted, her voice hoarse. There's one more thing I think you should know. I once carried Edward's child. Do you mind? I don't mind. Calvin answered without hesitation. Your past is not something I'll interfere with, but I hope your future will belong only to me. Alice paused slightly, as if making a final decision. In 1 week. I'll keep my promise. I'll return to City A and register our marriage. Calvin responded softly. I'll wait for you. After hanging up, Alice bought a plane ticket to Iceland and took a taxi to the airport. While boarding the plane, she received another message from Eulalia. Edward bought me another wedding ring. I love it! Attached was a photo of a dazzling diamond ring on her ring finger, easily 5 carats. Alice lowered her gaze to the simple band on her own finger and let out a self-mocking smile. She removed the ring and expressionlessly threw it into a trash bin. Her phone vibrated again. It was Edward. The company is very busy. I can't find time to pick you up. Just take a taxi back yourself. Whether he was busy with work or accompanying Eulalia, Alice no longer cared. From this moment on, everything about Edward had nothing to do with her anymore. The airplane slowly rose into the sky. Looking out the window, Alice felt a quiet anticipation for this solo journey. At the same time, Edward was shopping with Eulalia. Suddenly, a strange sense of panic rose in his chest. As if something had slipped out of his control, Alice's figure appeared in his mind. Only then did he remember that tomorrow night was the Hernandez family banquet. It was also the 5th anniversary of his marriage with Alice. He had been looking forward to that day for a long time, but now that it was about to arrive, instead of excitement, he felt an inexplicable unease. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to suppress that restless feeling. Seeing this, Eulalia asked with concern. Edward, what's wrong? Are you feeling unwell? It's nothing. Edward forced a smile. I just suddenly feel a little tightness in my chest. Oh, Eulalia nodded. Maybe the mall is too stuffy. Should I go outside with you for some fresh air? No need. You keep shopping. I'll step outside for a cigarette and come back to accompany you. All right then. Don't make me wait too long. Okay. Chapter 10. Edward quickly walked outside and lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag. The nicotine entering his lungs did nothing to ease him. Instead, the irritation inside him only grew stronger. He rubbed his exhausted temples and instinctively glanced at his phone. More than half an hour had passed since he sent Alice that message. Yet she still hadn't replied. Unable to hold back, he called her, but a mechanical female voice came from the receiver. Sorry, the number you have dialed is currently powered off. No wonder she hadn't replied. Her phone was turned off. Edward paused for a moment. Just as he was about to call the detention center to ask about the situation, he received a call from the old master of the Hernandez family. Edward, I heard that Eulalia has returned to the country, and the two of you have been entangled again recently. Is that true? Edward's eyelid twitched. Grandpa, who's been gossiping in front of you? Was it Alice? The old master snorted coldly. If you don't want people to know, don't do it in the first place. Don't push everything onto Alice. Tell me the truth, are you still involved with Eulalia? Don't forget that 5 years ago, when you lost your sight after the car accident, she didn't even come to see you once. She bought a plane ticket and went abroad immediately. A woman like that isn't worth you thinking about her all the time. Grandpa, Edward explained, Eulalia had no choice but to leave back then, and if it weren't for her, my eyes wouldn't have recovered. Stop always taking Alice's side. She's not as innocent as she appears. Nonsense. The old master snapped angrily. I've lived more than half my life. What kind of people haven't I seen? The one who misjudged someone is you. In any case, cut ties with that woman as soon as possible and live properly with Alice. Otherwise, I'll break your legs. With that, the call ended. Edward felt suffocated with anger. His face darkened as he opened the chat window with Alice. You were the one who complained to Grandpa, weren't you? Alice, I really underestimated you. Your schemes are deeper than I thought. The message still sank without a trace. Edward was furious and simply sent another harsh message. You think ignoring my messages will solve anything? If you have the guts, don't come home tonight. Alice used to reply to his messages instantly, but today, she was unusually silent. Another 2 hours passed, and Edward still received no response. He finally realized something was wrong. Just as he unlocked his phone to call her again, Eulalia stopped him. "Edward, you're not even paying attention while having dinner with me. Are you thinking about my sister?" Edward frowned. "She hasn't replied to any of my messages. I'm worried something might have happened to her." There were all kinds of people in the detention center. Could it be that Alice had been bullied inside? The thought made his chest tighten instantly, and a powerful sense of unease swept over him. To be fair, Alice was the gentlest woman he had ever met. She had almost no temper and was perfectly suited to be a wife. During the day, she acted like his personal assistant, handling every detail of his daily affairs. At night, she was his most perfect lover in bed, taking care of him thoroughly. She was intelligent and capable, even someone as picky as him could find no faults in her. Many times, he had even forgotten that he had originally married her out of necessity. After 5 years of living together day and night, he had gradually grown used to her presence, and perhaps, without realizing it, he had even developed feelings for her. Sometimes he wondered if Eulalia had never existed. Perhaps he could have turned this fake marriage into a real one, but there were no what-ifs in the world. Suddenly, his phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from the old master of the Hernandez family. "I can't reach Alice on the phone. Did you two have a fight? Bring her back tomorrow night no matter what. Otherwise, don't even think about inheriting the Hernandez family." Edward grew even more irritated and immediately called Alice, but the phone continued ringing with no answer. Chapter 11. Edward put away his phone with a dark expression and muttered to himself, "If you've got the nerve, then don't come back to me for the rest of your life." Eulalia secretly gritted her teeth at the sight, though her face remained calm. "Edward, my sister must still be angry that you sent her to the detention center. So she's deliberately ignoring your messages. Don't worry about her, and don't contact her again, otherwise, she'll just take advantage of your concern." Edward looked doubtful. "Really? Of course it's true," Eulalia said confidently. "I'm a woman too. I can see through her little tricks immediately. Stop worrying and try the steak I cut for you." Edward nodded, but he remained distracted, glancing at his phone from time to time. The steak was tender and juicy, yet it tasted like wax in his mouth. After finally finishing the meal, he eagerly called the waiter to pay the bill. Eulalia knew he was worried about Alice. A flash of viciousness passed through her eyes. That shameless woman! She was nothing more than a substitute bride. Why should Edward be so distracted by her? Hopefully, this time in the detention center would teach her a lesson. Otherwise, Eulalia curled her lips into a cold smile. She had personally instructed the guards to take good care of Alice. After being unable to contact her for so long, Alice was probably in serious trouble by now. After paying the bill, Edward planned to head back immediately, but Eulalia said she wanted dessert. After dessert, she said she wanted to watch the newest movie in theaters. Edward's patience was running out. Another day. "Alice hasn't responded to anything. I need to go back and check on her." Eulalia immediately pouted in dissatisfaction. "You keep saying I'm the one you love most. Then why do you keep thinking about her when you're with me?" Edward was speechless. After a long pause, he finally said, "Tomorrow is the family banquet. Grandpa likes Alice very much. If she doesn't show up, he'll definitely be angry. For the sake of the inheritance, I have to make sure she appears on time." "I don't believe you," Eulalia said angrily. "You must have fallen for her. You've been distracted all night. Don't think I didn't notice you thinking about her." "Eulalia, the person I love is you." Edward forced a stiff smile. "Forget it. I won't go back. Let's watch a movie instead. All right?" "Yay. I knew you cared about me the most." Eulalia opened a ticketing app excitedly. "How about this romance movie? It just came out." "Whatever," Edward replied casually. "As long as you're happy." While watching the movie, he still held his phone and sent messages to Alice. "Sending you to the detention center was just to teach you a lesson. What are you so angry about? You assaulted someone and didn't even apologize. What right do you have to complain to Grandpa? Do you think Grandpa can protect you forever? Alice, answer me." He sent more than a dozen messages in a row, but Alice never replied. Edward's temper finally flared. He was kindly checking on her, and she really thought she was Mrs. Hernandez? Fine. If she didn't want to respond, then so be it. At tomorrow night's family banquet, he would make her understand that she had never been Mrs. Hernandez. From beginning to end, he had never loved her. That night, Edward did not return to the villa. He stayed in the city center apartment with Eulalia. The next morning, he went straight to the company. Only 1 hour before the banquet began did he realize that there was still no news from Alice. He contacted the detention center and learned that she had been released yesterday afternoon. He scoffed coldly. It seemed Eulalia was right. Alice was deliberately ignoring his messages. Edward opened WeChat and typed with a cold expression. Alice, don't waste your effort. Playing hard to get won't work on me. You must attend tonight's family banquet on time. Otherwise, you'll bear the consequences. Chapter 12. After sending the message, Edward received a call from Eulalia. Edward, can I go back to the old mansion with you tonight? Edward frowned. Grandpa has a strong prejudice against you. For safety's sake, you'd better not come. I don't want to upset him. Eulalia snorted coldly. You said before that you would announce tonight that I'm the rightful Mrs. Hernandez. Now you won't even let me attend the family banquet. What exactly do you mean by that? Edward, you're not backing out, are you? Of course not. Edward interrupted in a deep voice. If it weren't for your loyalty, I would still be blind right now. Alice used her status as the Garcia family's eldest daughter to force you away and break us apart. I won't let her get away with it. It sounded as if he was reassuring Eulalia, but also convincing himself. Don't worry, Eulalia. I'll keep my promise to you. I'll come pick you up later, and we'll go back to the old mansion together. Edward, I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. Eulalia hung up the phone happily, but Alice's figure appeared in Edward's mind. According to the plan, he would reveal everything to the old master of the Hernandez family and to Alice tonight, then drive Alice out. Yet for some reason, the closer the banquet approached, the more restless he felt. A strong sense of unease surrounded him. At that moment, in Iceland, when the plane landed, fine snow was drifting through the airport. Alice tightened the windbreaker around her body and stepped off the plane with the crowd. Most of the people were traveling in pairs. Only she was alone. Suddenly she remembered that this trip was originally supposed to be the anniversary journey she would take with Edward. 3 years ago, he had already promised to bring her to Iceland to see the Northern Lights. But he was always busy. The trip was postponed again and again, and she waited again and again. It was only after Eulalia returned that she realized she had been living inside the lies he had carefully woven. A cold wind rushed toward her, carrying the scent of ice and snow, interrupting her thoughts. She took a deep breath, as if trying to release all the anger and sorrow trapped inside her body. She would enjoy this solo trip. In 1 week, she would return to the country and marry Calvin. Thinking of that, Alice shook her head, shaking away those unpleasant memories. City A. Hernandez Group. After hearing what the old master said, Edward Hernandez was slightly stunned. What exactly had happened to Alice? Why wasn't she even answering the old master's calls? He made up an excuse to end the call, then immediately dialed the familiar number. Just like before, Alice's phone was still turned off. He scoffed. She must still be angry with him. She really had some nerve. Wasn't she afraid of pushing things too far? Edward gritted his teeth and sent 2 messages. It's one thing for you to be angry with me, but why aren't you answering Grandpa's calls? He treats you so well. Do you really think this is how you should treat him? I'm giving you 30 minutes to appear in front of Grandpa. Otherwise, don't blame me for what I do next. Half an hour later, a black Rolls-Royce slowly stopped at the entrance of the Hernandez family's old mansion. Eulalia felt slightly nervous. Aside from Edward, everyone in the Hernandez family knew that the person who had stayed by Edward's side back then was Alice, not her. Sooner or later, Edward would discover the truth. There was no avoiding it forever. When the time came, she would simply insist that she knew nothing. After all, it was Alice who had been clever enough to use her name. It had nothing to do with her. Eulalia felt very pleased with herself, but she deliberately put on a worried expression. Edward, Grandpa Hernandez will definitely be angry when he sees me. What if he refuses to let us be together? Don't be afraid. I'm here. Edward patted the back of her hand reassuringly. Grandpa has always had prejudice against you, but once we explain everything clearly and let him know that you were forced away by Alice, he won't make things difficult for you anymore. Besides, we're already legally married. Even if he disagrees, there's nothing he can do to separate us." Eulalia smiled sweetly. "Edward, if it weren't for you, I really wouldn't know what to do." Chapter 13. Looking at her face, Edward couldn't help but see Alice's image in his mind. He shook his head, trying to shake that figure away. "Let's go. Don't keep Grandpa and the others waiting." Edward Hernandez appeared before everyone, holding Eulalia's hand, instantly becoming the center of attention. The old master of the Hernandez family stared in disbelief, his anger exploding. "Didn't I tell you to cut ties with this woman completely? You dare treat my words like the wind and even bring her here? Do you still have any respect for me as your grandfather?" Edward's father frowned. "That's right, Edward. She abandoned you and left when you were at your lowest. Why are you still entangled with her? Send her away immediately." Edward's mother snorted coldly, her eyes full of disdain. "I think you've lost your mind. Alice loves you so much. If it weren't for her staying by your side." "You've misunderstood, Eulalia," Edward interrupted in a deep voice. 5 years ago, when she left me, she had no choice." Eulalia nodded quickly, looking pitiful. "Grandpa Hernandez, Uncle, Auntie, you've really misunderstood me. Back then, my sister said that the person who had a marriage agreement with Edward was her, not me, and told me to give Edward back to her. After all, I'm not Mom and Dad's biological daughter. I had already taken my sister's place in the family for 20 years, so I had no right to stay. That's why I left on the wedding day. For the past 5 years, I've missed Edward every day, and he never forgot about me either. That's why I finally gathered the courage to return." The old master of the Hernandez family sneered. "You make it sound nice. If that were really the case, why didn't you say so 5 years ago? You abandoned Edward when he was blind and left without looking back. Now that he and Alice have finally overcome hardships and built a life together, you come back to stir up trouble. Shameless." Edward's father nodded in agreement. "Edward, you and Alice have been married for 5 years. You shouldn't let outsiders affect your marriage. Besides, today is the Hernandez family banquet. Bringing an outsider here is completely inappropriate." Edward's mother directly gave the order to leave. "Miss Garcia, tonight is the Hernandez family's family banquet. Please leave, and in the future, don't contact Edward again." Eulalia's face turned pale and flushed by turns. She looked toward Edward for help. "Edward." Edward hesitated for a moment. Then he simply revealed the truth about what he had done during the marriage registration 5 years ago. "So Eulalia isn't an outsider. We are the real legally married couple." The moment those words fell, the entire room went silent. It was so quiet that even a falling pin could be heard. Eulalia felt secretly pleased. So what if they all liked Alice? She was the rightful Mrs. Hernandez. After a moment, the old master of the Hernandez family was the first to recover. He slammed the table angrily. "You bastard!" Pointing at Edward, he shouted. "Alice gave you her whole heart. How could you treat her like this? For the sake of a woman full of false feelings, you even kept your own family in the dark." His chest heaved violently with anger, almost leaving him unable to breathe. Edward's father hurriedly poured him a cup of tea. "Dad, calm down. Don't let this ruin your health." "How can I calm down after what he's done?" The old master glared at Edward. "You're something else." "Edward! Alice didn't answer my calls and still hasn't shown up. Is this because of what you did?" Edward's mother suddenly realized something. "No wonder. I sent Alice a message today asking when she would come back, and she still hasn't replied." Edward froze for a moment and instinctively shook his head. "She probably doesn't know yet. Otherwise, things wouldn't be this calm." The old master laughed angrily. "You really are capable, keeping even the person sleeping beside you completely in the dark." Edward's expression turned awkward, but he said nothing. His mother was furious. "Edward, how did your father and I raise you? Alice is a good girl. You may not love her, but why deceive her and hurt her like this?" The old master cursed angrily. "You must really be blind. Instead of choosing a good woman like Alice, you insist on marrying a woman full of deceit like this." Chapter 14. Have some tea first. "I'll talk to him," Edward's father said. then turned to Edward and spoke in a deep voice. Tomorrow morning, when the Civil Affairs Bureau opens, take Miss Garcia there and complete the divorce procedures. After that, go apologize to Alice and make things right, and register your marriage with her properly as soon as possible. Eulalia's body stiffened. She couldn't help but speak up. Uncle, Edward and I truly love each other. This is the Hernandez family home. You don't get a say here. Edward's mother snapped. She called over a servant. Escort Miss Garcia out immediately. Yes, madam. The servant walked over to Eulalia. Miss Garcia, tonight is the Hernandez family banquet. We are not receiving guests. Please leave. Eulalia felt extremely embarrassed and instinctively grabbed Edward's arm. Edward moved to shield her behind him. Grandpa, Dad, Mom, I know you all have prejudice against Eulalia, but there's been a misunderstanding. When I had the car accident and lost my sight, she was the one who stayed by my side and searched everywhere for doctors for me. Before he could finish, the old master of the Hernandez family interrupted him. Wait a minute. Wasn't the person who accompanied you during your treatments Alice? What does that have to do with her? Edward's father also looked confused. That's right, Edward. It was Alice who found the doctors for you, not Eulalia. Edward's mother looked thoughtfully at Eulalia. Did you tell Edward that the person who stayed by his side back then was you? Eulalia had long prepared her answer. Calm and composed, she said. No, I didn't. I don't know why he would think it was me. Edward, when you had the accident, I didn't even know about it, so of course I wasn't the one by your side. With a loud boom, like thunder exploding in his ears, Edward's mind went completely blank. After a long moment, he finally came back to his senses and murmured softly. If it wasn't you, then who was it? Could it really have been Alice? Eulalia frowned and bit her lip. Since Grandpa Hernandez and Uncle and Auntie all say it was my sister, then it must have been her. Edward, if you decide to be with my sister because of this, I'll accept it. Tomorrow morning, we can go get a divorce, all right? No, Edward rejected the idea without hesitation. That's not what I meant. I just didn't expect that the person who stayed with me back then was actually her. I always thought it was you. Suddenly something occurred to him. If it wasn't you, then why didn't you deny it when I mentioned it before? Eulalia feigned surprise. Did you ever mention it? I don't remember. Edward's brows knitted tightly. No, that wasn't right. He remembered clearly. He had brought it up several times. Every time, Eulalia had silently accepted that she was the one who had stayed with him. Before he could think further, he heard the old master's mocking voice. Eulalia, I thought your schemes were clever, but now it seems they're nothing more than petty tricks that can't even stand in the open. Edward's mother quickly pulled Edward aside and lowered her voice. Now you see it clearly, don't you? She even tried to steal Alice's credit. What kind of decent woman could she be? Edward, listen to your father. Tomorrow go get that divorce. Then bring Alice back. She's the one truly suited for you. Edward Hernandez was filled with confusion. Mom, I clearly remember that when I lost my sight, you and Dad both told me the person staying by my side was Eulalia. Why has it suddenly become Alice? Edward's mother sighed and spoke with a hint of complaint. At the time your emotions were very unstable, and you were extremely hostile toward Alice. She had no choice but to lie and say she was Eulalia. Later, when your eyes recovered and you couldn't find Eulalia, you assumed Alice had forced her away. You flew into a rage at Alice and refused to listen to our explanations at all. Chapter 15. Edward let out a laugh. So just because I wouldn't listen, you all stopped explaining? I don't believe it. You must be lying. There has to be something else behind this. Edward's mother quickly said. At that time the doctor repeatedly warned us not to stimulate you again. Otherwise, your eyesight might have been lost permanently. Because of that, Alice persuaded us to let the misunderstanding continue and not explain anything further to you. Edward froze completely, disbelief filling his eyes. Why would she do that? Are you really that dense? His mother said, looking disappointed. Why else? Because she loved you and cared about you. She was afraid something would happen to your eyes. Edward, in any case, you must bring Alice back. Only she deserves to be the daughter-in-law of the Hernandez family. Do you understand? The old master of the Hernandez family had run out of patience. If you can't even handle your own emotional affairs, how can I trust you with the Hernandez family?" After saying that, he turned and went upstairs without another word. Edward's father didn't bother to say much either. "Edward, your grandfather's attitude is my attitude. I'm giving you 3 days to settle this matter. If you can't, then don't come back." After he left, Edward's mother spoke earnestly. "Edward, I've always believed you were a sensible child, but this time, you've truly disappointed me. I'm tired. Go back and reflect on yourself. Think carefully about where you went wrong." Edward didn't even know how he left the old mansion. By the time he came back to his senses, he was already on the way back. Eulalia sat silently beside him, occasionally sneaking glances at him. Suddenly Edward spoke. "Other than this matter, what else have you lied to me about?" Before she could answer, he continued. 5 years ago, did Alice really force you to leave? Or did you leave because I was blind and you were afraid my eyesight would never recover?" Eulalia had already anticipated this question and prepared her answer. "Of course it was because my sister forced me. Edward, you've truly misunderstood me. I love you so much. If I hadn't been forced, how could I possibly bear to leave you? And I only learned about your blindness afterward. If I had known 5 years ago, no matter what, I would never have gone abroad." Edward said nothing. He narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at her, as if trying to determine whether she was lying. Under his gaze, Eulalia began to feel uneasy. Pretending to be angry, she said, "If you don't believe me, then let's get a divorce. I can already see that you've been thinking about my sister the whole time. If I had known you had fallen in love with her, I would never have come back to make things difficult for you. Fortunately, it's not too late to divorce now. Your family doesn't like me anyway, and I don't want to see you arguing with them because of me." She spoke rapidly without stopping, and Edward's head started to ache from listening. "All right, I was just asking casually. Do you really have to say things like that?" Eulalia looked extremely aggrieved, tears welling in her eyes. "You weren't just asking casually. You were clearly doubting my sincerity. Even if my sister was the one who stayed by your side 5 years ago. Don't forget, 7 years ago, when your enemies were chasing you and you were on the brink of death, I risked my life to carry you to the hospital." The moment Edward remembered that event, the hostility in his eyes instantly disappeared. Eulalia was his lifesaver. Even if Alice had stayed by his side 5 years ago, she still couldn't compare to Eulalia. Thinking of this, Edward dismissed the doubts in his heart. "I'm sorry, Eulalia, that was my fault," he said gently. "I shouldn't have doubted you. Don't be angry. I'll take you out for something good to eat. All right?" Only then did Eulalia smile through her tears. "After dinner, come shopping with me. I want to buy some jewelry." "All right, whatever you want." Edward instructed the driver to go to the nearest shopping mall. After dinner, just as they were about to head to a jewelry store, Edward's phone rang. "Mr. Hernandez, the pink diamond ring you ordered has arrived. We will deliver it to your residence shortly." Only then did Edward remember that the ring was a breakup gift he had prepared for Alice. Although they were not truly husband and wife, they had shared the same bed for 5 years. She had treated him sincerely, so naturally he had never been stingy with her when it came to money. Anything she liked, he would buy without hesitation. Coincidentally, that jewelry store was on the floor above them. Chapter 16. 10 minutes later, Edward brought Eulalia to the jewelry store. The manager personally received him and took out the pink diamond ring. "Mr. Hernandez, this is the ring you ordered earlier." Edward glanced at it and imagined what Alice would look like wearing it. The corners of his lips lifted unconsciously. "All right, wrap it up." Based on how well he knew her, she would definitely love it. Just as he was about to take out his phone to contact her, he suddenly heard Eulalia exclaim, "Wow, it's so beautiful. No need to wrap it, I'll just wear it directly." Thinking it was meant for her, she reached out to take the ring. Edward frowned. "Eulalia, this ring is for Alice." Hearing that, Eulalia's hand froze in midair. A flash of shock and viciousness crossed her eyes. That shameless woman! She didn't deserve such a beautiful ring. Didn't Edward say he didn't love her? Then why would he buy such an expensive ring for her? Edward's attention remained fixed on the pink diamond ring, so he didn't notice the expression on Eulalia's face. He unlocked his phone, took a photo of the ring, and sent it to Alice. "This is for you. Do you like it? You probably already know some things. No matter what, we're not enemies. Let's talk face to face. I'll go back later. Wait for me at home." Eulalia could see every message he sent. She was so angry her teeth nearly shattered from grinding. She spoke unhappily. "Edward, I really like this ring. Can you give it to me?" Edward stared at his phone, waiting for Alice's reply without even looking up. He refused. "Not this one. You can choose any other piece here." A vicious flash passed through Eulalia's eyes. She spoke in a sulking tone. "I want this one. You keep saying the person you love is me. Why can't you even give me a ring?" Edward frowned and answered without thinking. "I specially ordered this for her. Her skin is fair. Pink diamonds look good on her." Eulalia stomped her foot angrily. "So you mean my skin is dark and I don't deserve to wear pink diamonds?" Realizing he had spoken carelessly, Edward corrected himself. "That's not what I meant. There are so many pieces of jewelry here. Why do you insist on taking hers?" Eulalia was rendered speechless. Seeing the awkward atmosphere, the manager quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "Miss, we have many other beautifully designed rings here. Let me bring some for you to try." He warmly invited Eulalia to sit at the counter. "Look, these are all new arrivals. Which one do you like?" Eulalia used the opportunity to step down and casually pointed to one. "That one. Let me try it. You have excellent taste. This is a limited edition worldwide." Meanwhile, Edward kept staring at his phone, waiting for Alice's reply. Strange. This was the first time she had taken so long to respond to his messages. Unable to hold back, he called her. As expected, her phone was still powered off. It had already been 2 days. No matter how angry she was, she should have calmed down by now. Unless she had really discovered the truth about him and Eulalia. A powerful sense of panic swept through Edward instantly. He immediately called the villa's landline. A servant answered quickly. "Sir, what can I do for you?" Edward said. "Where is Madam?" "Let her answer the phone. Madam isn't home," the servant replied. "After you sent her to the detention center, she hasn't returned." Edward froze. "But the detention center said she left yesterday. Are you sure she hasn't come back?" "I'm sure. I've been home these past 2 days and really haven't seen Madam." "All right, I understand." Edward hung up and immediately contacted his assistant, ordering him to locate Alice. After waiting anxiously for a moment, the assistant called back. "President Hernandez, Madam's phone is turned off, so I couldn't determine her location." Edward laughed coldly. "Find another way within 1 hour. I want to know exactly where she is." "Yes, President Hernandez. I'll investigate right away." Edward's mind was full of questions. What exactly was Alice trying to do? Even if she knew the truth, she could have confronted him directly. Why hide instead? Meanwhile, Eulalia finished choosing her jewelry and called for him to pay the bill. She called several times before Edward finally noticed. When he learned she had spent more than 70 million yuan in one purchase, Edward frowned slightly. Chapter 17. Over the past 5 years, Alice had never spent money so extravagantly. If he didn't buy something for her, she would never ask for it herself. Unlike Eulalia, in just over half a month since returning to the country, she had already spent more than 200 million of his money. Villas, sports cars, jewelry, clothes, handbags, anything she liked, she would take without even looking at the price. The old master of the Hernandez family had started from nothing and lived frugally all his life. He often repeated the saying that wealth rarely lasted beyond 3 generations. Edward had grown up hearing that, so he was extremely dissatisfied with Eulalia's spending habits. He glanced at the jewelry she had chosen and frowned. "Eulalia, this set looks almost identical to the one you bought last week." What he meant was clear, there was no need to buy it again. Eulalia understood, and anger burned inside her, though she hid it well. "Edward, as the saying goes, people judge by appearances. I'm now the young mistress of the Hernandez family. I have to pay more attention to my appearance. Otherwise people will look down on me, and the Hernandez family will lose face." Edward replied. "If someone looks down on you just because of what you're wearing, it only shows that person's vision is too narrow. He was eager to return to the villa and had no interest in continuing the argument. He simply took out his black card and paid the bill. This time it's fine, but don't let it happen again. Eulalia's face alternated between pale and flushed. Her manicured nails dug into her palm. She had only bought a set of jewelry. Yet Edward was already reluctant. Did he think she didn't know that the pink diamond he had ordered for Alice cost over 100 million? She was the real Mrs. Hernandez. Why did she have to watch Edward's expression when spending tens of millions, while Alice, the fake wife, could get whatever she wanted effortlessly? Jealousy twisted Eulalia's face. She swore she would never let Alice have it easy. After paying the bill, Edward turned and prepared to leave. Eulalia quickly grabbed his arm. "Edward, I still want to watch a movie. Come with me, please." Edward sounded impatient. "Didn't we watch one just last night?" "Another time. Alice's phone is still off, and I can't reach her. I need to go back and check." Eulalia bit her lip. "You keep talking about Alice, even while shopping with me. You're thinking about her. Who exactly is your wife?" Edward's patience finally ran out. "Eulalia, I need to settle things between her and me. Besides, you know the person in my heart is you. Stop making a scene, all right? If you don't want to go back, keep shopping. I'll have the driver pick you up later." With that, he walked away without looking back. All the color drained from Eulalia's face, and her eyes darkened with malice. "Fine, Alice. I gave you a chance to live, but you refused it. In that case, don't blame me for being ruthless." Eulalia took out her phone, walked into a corner, and made a call. "I want Alice to disappear completely from this world. Name your price." Night fell. Edward drove back to the villa at high speed. The moment he pushed open the door, a strange emptiness greeted him. Alice's presence had vanished completely. Everywhere he looked, her belongings were gone. The painting at the entrance, something they bought together during their honeymoon in Paris. The floor lamp beside the sofa, something they had assembled together. And the glass vase that used to sit on the dining table, the one they had made together in a studio for their first wedding anniversary. A wave of intense unease and panic surged through Edward. His entire body trembled uncontrollably, and his heartbeat accelerated. He called over a servant, his lips trembling. "Where are all those things?" The servant quickly replied, "Madam burned them all that day. You came back that day too." Edward's heart sank heavily. He remembered now. That day, he had asked Alice what she was burning. She said it was trash. So that was it. Edward couldn't understand why she would burn the things she once treasured the most. Suddenly, his phone rang. Instinctively, he thought it was Alice calling and answered immediately without checking. "Alice, you finally decided to call me? Where did you run off to? I've been searching everywhere for you." But the next second, his assistant's voice came through the receiver. "President Hernandez. It's me. I've searched everywhere, but we still haven't found Madam. She hasn't bought any plane tickets or train tickets under her name, and there are no hotel records either." Edward frowned, displeased. How could there be absolutely no trace? It's as if Madam has disappeared from the world. "Impossible," Edward sneered. "She's a living person. How could she vanish into thin air? Keep searching, even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. Find her for me." After hanging up, Edward's entire body trembled. He opened WeChat and continued sending messages to Alice. "We shared the same bed for 5 years. You couldn't even say goodbye before leaving? Alice, you don't actually think this will get my attention, do you?" Chapter 18. The chat window was filled with messages, almost all of them Edward's one-sided monologue. A whole week had passed, yet there was still no news from Alice. During this time, Edward's father and mother called him repeatedly, asking whether the divorce had been finalized and whether Alice had returned home. Edward grew increasingly irritated and had no idea how to answer them. His father warned him sternly, "Your grandfather likes Alice very much and has a strong dislike for Eulalia. If you still want to inherit the Hernandez family, don't go against his wishes. Besides, Eulalia simply isn't worthy of being our daughter-in-law. I won't say more than that, you can investigate it yourself." After the call ended, Edward sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he contacted his assistant. "Investigate why Eulalia went abroad back then, and what she's been doing over the past 5 years. Yes, President Hernandez. The assistant worked efficiently. Half an hour later, he pushed open the office door. President Hernandez. "I found everything you asked me to investigate." Seeing his hesitant expression, Edward's eyelids twitched. "Just say it." "Yes." The assistant quickly continued. 5 years ago, when you had the car accident and lost your sight, Hernandez Group's stock price was plummeting. There were rumors that the Hernandez family might go bankrupt. Miss Garcia immediately bought a plane ticket and left the country overnight. During those 5 years abroad, her private life was quite chaotic. She dated more than a dozen boyfriends. Edward's back stiffened. His breathing paused. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," the assistant nodded. "I contacted some of Miss Garcia's friends overseas. They all spoke poorly of her." He hesitated before continuing. "President Hernandez, you've been deceived by that woman. She really can't compare to Madam. 5 years ago, when you lost your sight, Madam was the one who stayed by your side and searched everywhere for doctors. Madam loves you deeply. In her eyes, there's only you. You really shouldn't distance yourself from her for the sake of an outsider." The assistant had no idea that Edward and Eulalia were the legally married couple, so he still believed that Alice was Mrs. Hernandez. Edward suddenly felt irritated. "How much money did Alice give you for you to speak up for her too?" "Absolutely none," the assistant quickly explained. "Except when it concerns you. Madam never contacts me at all." To prove his innocence, he took out his phone and opened the chat window with Alice. "President Hernandez, look, every message Madam sent me was about you." Edward froze and instinctively took the phone. Sure enough, every message between the assistant and Alice was about him. "Assistant Law, it's very hot today. Please remind Edward to drink more water. Thank you. Assistant Law, Edward had social engagements last night. I made some ginseng tea. Please come downstairs and pick it up. Assistant Law, the temperature suddenly dropped. I brought Edward a cashmere sweater." Edward stood there motionless. An indescribable feeling surged through his chest, emotions churning in his eyes. So Alice had cared about him this much. The assistant spoke cautiously. "President Hernandez, Madam really loves you. When you once said the coffee I bought tasted bad, she found out and personally bought some to deliver to the company. And every time you returned from business dinners, Madam was the one who brewed the hangover tea for you." Edward came back to his senses and interrupted coldly. "If she loves me so much, why has she disappeared for so long without sending even a single message?" "Well," the assistant hesitated. "My guess is Madam must have been jealous and angry about you and Miss Garcia. Why don't you try comforting her and apologizing?" "Apologize to her? In your dreams?" Edward snorted coldly. "Contact her right now. Tell her I'm giving her 1 day. If she doesn't come back, then she should never come back again." Chapter 19. The assistant was shocked. "President Hernandez, doing this will only push Madam further away. If I tell you to send it, then send it. Stop talking so much." Edward tossed the phone over, his gaze fixed coldly on the assistant. "All right, I'll send it right away." Helpless, the assistant contacted Alice under Edward's watch. "Madam, where are you? President Hernandez asked me to tell you to come back soon. He's very worried about you." The message had barely been sent when Alice replied. "Assistant Law, Edward and I have nothing to do with each other anymore. From now on, you don't need to relay anything about him to me. The assistant's eyes widened. He instinctively looked at Edward. President Hernandez." Madam replied. "What did she say?" "She said, she has nothing to do with you anymore and told me not to contact her again." Edward's expression froze. He quickly snatched the phone from the assistant. Sure enough, Alice's cold reply lay plainly in the chat box. After staring at it for a few seconds, Edward typed quickly, "Alice, where exactly are you? If you've got the nerve, say that to my face." But the moment he pressed send, a red exclamation mark popped up. "Sorry, you are no longer friends with this user." Edward laughed in anger. He immediately switched to his own phone and tried contacting Alice. The call connected, but was quickly hung up. When he tried again, the system informed him that he had been blocked. Edward laughed coldly. "You hid from me for a whole week and now you can't keep your composure anymore. Is that it? Let's see how long you can keep this up." But soon, he came across a breaking news headline. Hashtag Calvin Cruz. The current head of the Cruz family and the richest man in City A returns to the country, spotted at the airport picking up his girlfriend, both seen inseparable. Wedding rumors spreading. Hashtag. In the photo, the bright and beautiful face was unmistakable. If it wasn't Alice, then who else could it be? Taiping Peak. No. 99, White Plus Road. After picking Alice up at the airport, Calvin took her straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Before registering the marriage, Alice hesitated. Are you sure you won't regret this? Of course not. Calvin looked straight into her eyes, his voice sincere. Alice, I've waited for this day for 10 years. From the very first time I saw you, I decided that I would marry no one but you. Alice thought she had misheard him. 10 years? But we only met 5 years ago. Calvin chuckled softly. I knew you wouldn't remember. It's all right. Let's get the marriage certificate first. I'll explain it to you later. Alice, have you thought this through? In the Cruz family, there has only ever been widowhood, never divorce. Alice couldn't help but smile. That suits me perfectly. She had never intended to divorce. Once married, it meant staying together until the end of life. Even without love, mutual respect would be enough. When they walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, each of them held a bright red marriage certificate. Suddenly, Calvin took the one from her hand. A mischievous glint flashed in his eyes. Important documents should be kept by me. Before she could say anything, he placed a black and gold card into her hand. Mrs. Cruz, this is all my property. From now on, you handle the spending, and I'll handle earning the money. We'll each do our part for the rest of our lives. Please take care of me. Oh, and the thing I promised you, give me 3 more days. In 3 days, the shares under Edward's name will be transferred to you. After that, Calvin took her back to the Cruz family mansion and introduced her to his family. Everyone liked Alice very much. The atmosphere was filled with surprise, joy, and laughter. Old Madame Cruz was so happy she couldn't stop smiling. She immediately took off the jade bracelet on her wrist and gave it to Alice. Mr. Cruz transferred $100 million on the spot, while Calvin's mother gifted them 2 villas and a nanny car as wedding presents. Alice was overwhelmed and didn't know what to say. Seeing this, Calvin accepted the gifts on her behalf. All right, this is your first meeting, everyone. Calm down a little, don't scare my wife. She just spent more than 10 hours on a flight. I'll take her upstairs to rest first. Has been on a plane for so long. She must be exhausted. Go rest quickly. Tonight I'll have the kitchen prepare something delicious for you. Old Madame Cruz said kindly. Thank you, Grandma. Alice thanked every member of the Cruz family before turning and going upstairs with Calvin. Chapter 20. Alice felt restrained, even a little uneasy. Calvin could naturally tell what she was worried about. After bringing her upstairs, he smiled and told her, from now on, this entire floor is your territory. Without your permission, no one is allowed to come up here, including me. Alice didn't understand and looked at him in confusion. Calvin patiently explained. Until the day you truly accept me, I won't force you to do anything. Hearing this, Alice froze. He was nothing like the rumors about him being reckless and indulgent. Instead, he was the perfect gentleman. In fact, Calvin was also a very considerate man. The soft furnishings in the bedroom were all in Alice's favorite style. Even the bedding was the brand she usually used. Not only that, the spacious walk-in closet was filled with the newest collections from major luxury brands, all in her size, as if everything had been custom-made for her. The cosmetics and skincare products were also complete. Every single one was something she normally used. Alice knew this could not possibly be a coincidence. The words Calvin said before they registered their marriage echoed in her ears. Alice, I've waited for this day for 10 years. From the very first time I saw you, I decided that I would marry no one but you. Alice couldn't understand it no matter how much she thought about it. She clearly remembered that the first time they met was at the Garcia family's recognition banquet. So why did Calvin say it was 10 years ago? As if knowing what she was thinking, Calvin answered her question himself. Alice, I knew you wouldn't remember me. 10 years ago, on Christmas Eve, it was my coming-of-age ceremony. That night my father announced that I would inherit the Cruz family. Because of that, my half-brother hated me and secretly colluded with my father's rival to kidnap me. When the car passed by the harbor, I smashed the window and jumped out while the kidnappers weren't paying attention. But my leg was injured. I had only taken a few steps before they caught up with me. At the most dangerous moment, a little girl suddenly shouted, "Police officer, there are bad guys here. Come catch them." The kidnappers were startled and immediately drove away. That's how I escaped. Afterward, the little girl called an ambulance, accompanied me to the hospital, and even paid my medical fees in advance. But when I came out of the operating room, she had already left. At this point, Calvin paused and looked at Alice without blinking. "Do you remember now? You were that little girl." Alice was stunned. "So, you're the big brother I saved back then?" Calvin smiled and nodded. "Have I changed so much that you never recognized me?" "No." Alice shook her head. "That night I was very scared, and your face was covered in blood, so I never saw what you looked like clearly." Calvin asked softly, "You were so timid, why did you still save me?" Alice replied, "I didn't think that much at the time, but even if I had to choose again, I would still save you. After all, it was a human life." The smile on Calvin's lips deepened. "Thank you for saving me. Without you, I wouldn't be alive today. I always wanted to thank you in person, but after I was discharged from the hospital, I couldn't find you. The next time I saw you, you were already the Garcia family's eldest daughter." Alice sighed softly. "Yes, fate can be so strange." Calvin resisted the urge to pull her into his arms and said in a restrained voice, "After going in circles, you've returned to my side. Alice, this time, I will never lose you again." At the same time, on the other side of the city, Edward simply couldn't believe that Alice would really be with Calvin. She must have done it on purpose, because he hadn't gone to find her. So she used this trick to force him to show himself. Yes, that had to be the reason. Edward kept telling himself not to fall for her trick. But the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger and stronger. This feeling of losing control was driving him almost to the edge of collapse. Chapter 21. A moment later, Edward grabbed his car keys and went to a bar to drown his sorrows. That night, he drank himself completely drunk. He was a regular there. So the bar manager called Alice as usual. The woman on the other end spoke coldly. "Edward and I have nothing to do with each other. Please don't call me again." The bar manager was stunned. If he hadn't recognized Alice's voice, he would have thought he had dialed the wrong number. What was going on? Wasn't Alice Edward's wife? Why would she say she had nothing to do with him? Before he could think further, Edward's phone rang. The caller was Eulalia. The manager quickly answered and told her that Edward was drunk. Eulalia rushed over soon after, looking at the drunken man. How could she not understand what was happening? "Edward, what is it about my sister that's so special? Why can't you forget her? I'm clearly your legal wife. Yet these past few days you haven't even let me see you." The bar manager, who had been quietly watching the drama unfold, widened his eyes in shock as he looked at them. So Alice had been telling the truth. The real Mrs. Hernandez was someone else. He secretly took out his phone, snapped photos of the two of them, and sent them to a paparazzo he knew. "I've got a shocking secret. Edward and Alice aren't legally married. The woman in front of him is his real wife." The paparazzi quickly rushed over and aimed their cameras at Edward and Eulalia, taking countless photos. That very night, a sensational headline shot to the top of the trending lists. #breaking, Hernandez family heir Edward Hernandez deceived the woman by his side while secretly entangled with Eulalia. The article detailed the entire story of how Edward had deceived Alice for 5 years. It also mentioned how Eulalia had abandoned Edward when he was blind and spent 5 carefree years abroad. Overnight, the entire city of City A knew. Edward was labeled a hypocritical, heartless man who had also been deceived by Eulalia. Not long after Eulalia sent Edward back to the villa, he received a call from the old master of the Hernandez family. "I gave you time to deal with the divorce. Is this how you handled it? Now everyone knows you're a fool being played by a woman. You've completely disgraced me. From this moment on, you are not allowed to return to the Hernandez family. Don't bother coming to the company either. I will reconsider the matter of the inheritance." With that, the old master hung up without waiting for a reply. Edward Hernandez sobered up instantly. He opened the news notification on his phone. After seeing the report, he exploded with anger. "Eulalia, didn't I tell you we shouldn't meet for the time being? Who told you to come find me? Eulalia was both angry and aggrieved. You were drunk. I got out of bed in the middle of the night to go to the bar and pick you up. If you don't appreciate it, fine, but why are you yelling at me? Edward said coldly. Even if you hadn't come, I could have returned safely on my own. Eulalia was left speechless by his response. Fine, consider it my fault for meddling. I'll leave right now. Suddenly, Edward remembered something. He stood up, took out the divorce agreement he had already prepared, and threw it in front of her. Take a look. If you have no objections, sign it. Eulalia froze. Why you want to divorce me? Why? Have you really fallen in love with Alice? What does she have that I don't? Why do you keep thinking about her? If I hadn't given you blood 7 years ago, you would have died. Edward interrupted her coldly. Stop acting. I already know that the person who saved me 7 years ago wasn't you. Chapter 22. A few days earlier, Edward had already begun to feel suspicious, so he specifically asked his assistant to investigate the matter. Just as he had expected, the person who gave him a blood transfusion in the hospital 7 years ago was not Eulalia at all, but a complete stranger. Yet Eulalia had claimed to be his lifesaver and deceived him for 7 whole years. Now that her lie had been exposed, Eulalia still tried to argue. So in order to divorce me, you're even denying that I saved your life? Well done, Edward. Turns out you're this cold and heartless. If I had known, I would never have saved you. You want a divorce, right? Then give me half your wealth, otherwise forget about it. Edward laughed in anger. You lied to me for so long and still want to take half of my property? Eulalia sneered. According to the law, your assets belong to both of us as marital property. If we divorce, I have the right to take half of what belongs to me. Don't think I don't know. You want to divorce me so you can go back to Alice. Unfortunately for you, she's climbed to a higher branch now. She's about to become Mrs. Cruz. Her relentless barrage of words made Edward's expression turn extremely ugly. Eulalia, sign the papers and get out. Eulalia laughed coldly. I already said it. Give me half your wealth and I'll agree to the divorce. Edward's eyes darkened. His face as gloomy as a storm cloud. If you sign now, I can let the past go. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Eulalia rolled her eyes. You keep accusing me of lying. What exactly did I lie about? You were the one who went and registered the marriage certificate yourself, without even telling me. If anyone broke the law, it was you. In short, my answer is the same. If you want a divorce, pay up. Otherwise stop bothering me. After saying that, she turned and left with no other choice. Edward contacted a lawyer to handle the divorce, but the lawyer told him that when he secretly bribed officials and registered the marriage certificate with Eulalia without her knowledge, he had indeed violated the law. If he wanted a divorce, the matter had to be settled privately. If it became public, the one who would suffer the consequences would be him. Edward was furious and smashed his phone to the ground. In the end, after bargaining with Eulalia, he had to agree to pay 10 billion yuan to persuade her to sign the divorce. I'll send you my account number, Eulalia said. Once the money arrives, I'll sign. Just as Edward Hernandez prepared to transfer the money, he suddenly discovered that all of his bank accounts had been frozen. At the same time, he received a call from his assistant, President Hernandez. Something terrible has happened. Eulalia sold all the shares under your name using the identity of your wife. What? Edward shouted. I just received a call from the legal department of the Cruz Group. That's when I learned Eulalia sold all your shares to Calvin. She has already fled with the money, but the share transfer procedures were all legally compliant. The lawyer said there's no way to revoke the transaction. The assistant continued saying something, but Edward could no longer hear clearly. He hung up the phone and immediately contacted Calvin, demanding to know why he had done this. The man on the other end laughed pleasantly, his voice deep and smooth. My wife wanted it. How could I refuse such a small wish? Edward's pupils trembled. It took him a long time to react. You married Alice? Impossible. She loved me so much. How could she marry you? You're lying. Calvin laughed openly. She did love you once, but you didn't cherish her. Instead, you deceived and hurt her. Now she doesn't love you anymore. Our wedding is scheduled for early next month. If President Hernandez has time, You're welcome to attend and have a drink. Edward was about to speak when he suddenly heard Alice's voice from the phone. Calvin, have you seen my light blue scarf? Just a moment, I'll get it for you. After saying that, Calvin spoke to Edward again. Sorry, President Hernandez. My wife and I are heading out. We'll talk another time. The call was quickly disconnected. Edward immediately called back, but no one answered. He hurriedly contacted a friend at the Civil Affairs Bureau and asked him to check Alice's marital status. Half a minute later, the friend told him that 3 days earlier, Alice had registered her marriage with Calvin. Edward's heart seemed to stop beating. Are you sure there's no mistake? I'm sure, the friend said. Edward, I saw the news. How could you deceive Alice like that? Everyone saw how much she gave for you. Edward couldn't bear to listen any longer. He hung up the phone, grabbed his car keys, and rushed out. A heavy rain was pouring outside, making the road extremely slippery. While speeding around a curve, his sports car lost control and crashed into an oncoming truck. A sharp pain shot through both of his legs. Edward convulsed in agony. He watched helplessly as blood flowed from his body, yet he didn't even have the strength to call for help. At that moment, Alice was the only thing on his mind. It turned out that he had fallen in love with her long ago. What a cruel joke. Only after losing her did he realize that he loved her. A wave of overwhelming regret and pain engulfed him. In despair, he slowly closed his eyes. The accident caused a traffic jam, and passers-by quickly called for an ambulance. Edward, covered in blood, was lifted onto a stretcher just as a black Bentley passed by. Alice, sitting in the passenger seat, seemed to sense something. She instinctively looked out the window, but all she saw were the backs of the medical staff. She withdrew her gaze and leaned back against the seat, listening quietly to the music. Outside the window, the rain had stopped. A rainbow stretched across the sky.